and a challenging year for many of us, especially for health and international solidarity activists. So every time we thought things couldn't get worse, the reality in Palestine and the broader Middle East has continued to shock us. We are now almost 15 months into the genocide in Gaza and the renewed Israeli aggression in the occupied West Bank. In Lebanon, a so-called ceasefire has held for 3 weeks, but it's a unilateral one, raising more questions than hope. And meanwhile, the political situation in Syria has shifted dramatically. And just days ago, WHO Director General Dr. Tedros narrowly survived a bombing at an airport in Yemen, where he was preparing to board a plane. And I haven't even mentioned Sudan, where foreign powers continue to fan the flames of war. To add to the uncertainty, next month brings Donald Trump's inauguration as US president, which could mean an even more aggressive administration leading the world's largest military force. So for global health activists trying to make sense of these rapidly evolving events, these are difficult times. And that's why we've invited 3 eminent activists from the Middle East to join us today. They'll help us unpack what's happening in the region and explore the implications for health activism. So we have Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who was still logging in as we started the webinar, who is the General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative. We have Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah, a well-known activist and a British-Palestinian war surgeon. And there's also Zaina Mohana, who is director of the Amal Association International, based in Lebanon. You will be able to ask your questions in the chat, and that's where I can pick up some of the questions and ask them to our speakers. But Zaina, I would like to start in Lebanon and ask you, actually, how did the war in Lebanon these past few months, how did it affect the local population? Can you tell us more about that?
Thank you, Wim. Thank you, Miguel, Roman, for this. And thank you for PHM, really, for always raising very important questions and for grouping us with our dear comrades, Dr. Abu-Sittah and Dr. Barghouti, who's everybody, I think, is doing his fight from his end. Lebanon has endured a 66 days war. For us, really, being here, it's almost like a dream. I don't think that we digested it yet of really what happened. We're very thankful that the ceasefire took place, but everybody's very afraid that if the 60 days that are ending in 27 January, the war will start again in a time where there is now 16,000 injured civilian, around 4,000 death of civilian, other than around 4,000 military that also lost their lives in this fight. The estimated destruction of households is almost nearly now, the number is being quantified, but we're talking of our Prime Minister was asking for $5 billion, but economically the estimate are around $12 to $15 billion of destruction and impact on the economy. Noting that also there's a huge impact on the use of phosphorus. There are also threat of possible use of depleted uranium. We know that many people lost their livelihood from the farmers, and not forgetting that a lot of unexploded ordnance were thrown, and these with time and with the rain will become landmines, and a lot of lives will be lost. More than 32 villages are fully destroyed on the buffer zone with the borders of the occupied territory of Palestine. And unfortunately, we're seeing that the Israeli forces are trying to do settlements in the south of Lebanon. So we know that this is the plan of a greater Israel. Unfortunately, the full scenario is very much shaken, but people's mental health are so much affected. People are stranded because even if they went back and they saw that their house is still standing, there is a huge hit on the infrastructure, water, electricity, in addition to the socioeconomic challenge that Lebanon has already been facing. So situation is not great. We have seen a huge wave of brain drain. But yeah, we know that Lebanon in many places has different scenarios, but in general, what is happening now, especially we were saying that the occupied Israeli forces were on one side, now they are on two sides of Lebanon. So definitely this is very worrying for the way forward. So people are very much affected. The economic situation is really in a dire situation because Lebanon received only 30% of the relief items that were planned to be received. So we cannot say, definitely Lebanon has been known for resilience and life goes on and they're trying to cherish these moments of Christmas and New Year, but no doubt that people are very worried for the way forward. We can speak more about it in details.
Yeah, thank you, Zaina. Ghassan, actually, you're also based in Lebanon, and we were talking about this ceasefire. But is there really a ceasefire? What do you experience these days?
So the situation in Lebanon is, and from my vantage point as a reconstructive surgeon, is that the wounded still require surgical interventions, still require surgery, reconstructive surgery, and we're looking at 1,300 children, around 13,000 adults who are wounded, and these require repeated surgeries. We're also looking at an increasing number, as Zaina said, of people that are now being injured as a result of unexploded munitions. I had a week ago 2 brothers who were farmers in the Beqa Valley, and they were plowing their land for the first time since the war, and one of the bombs exploded. And then we now have an influx of Syrians, both wounded Syrians escaping the new powers in Syria, who are targeting the wounded in the hospitals who belong to the previous Syrian army. And so their families are taking them and bringing them across the border to Lebanese hospitals. And from the religious and sectarian minorities in Syria who are escaping, whom they believe are Islamist fundamentalist organizations who have been targeting these sects, these religious groups in Syria. In addition, we have had an open refusal of by the Israelis to withdraw from South Lebanon, implementing the idea that what the Israelis are now looking for is literally the Zionist land without a people, a buffer zone that extends from the Mediterranean to the Mediterranean and going all the way around. So from South Lebanon, round the Golan Heights to Dar'a, and then back into Gaza and the Sinai Desert. And that will be cleared of populations, and that's what the Israelis are doing in Lebanon. And then we have the legacy, and we're still treating them, of history's largest single act of mass maiming. The pager attack was an act of deliberate mutilation by the Israelis. The Israelis, if it's true, this documentary 60 Minutes, where a Mossad agent was supposedly talking about the operation, booby-trapped 10,000 pagers. We have 4,000 wounded, 80% have lost one or both eyes, 95% have had total or partial amputations of the hands. They still need surgical interventions. They are still debilitated. And so all of that is added to the legacy of the destruction of the health system. Israel killed over 140 health workers in Lebanon and targeted directly and indirectly multiple hospitals in Lebanon, taking 12 out of service by the end of the war. And so these hospitals, some of them have been repaired, some of them are still out of service. And the Lebanese economy is incapable of replenishing the consumables and the medication that have lost. And so if at the end of this temporary ceasefire, the ceasefire doesn't hold and the Israelis, as they said, don't go back. The other point that Zaina made, and we need to be clear, is that the Israeli army now, because of occupying a third of Syria, is 12 kilometers away from Al-Masna, which is the border crossing between Syria and Lebanon. And the Israelis have now the ability to cut Lebanon in half if they surge towards the Beqa Valley, or to convert Lebanon into another Gaza, where they control all of the international borders with Lebanon. And so the situation is extremely dire. And the reason is that what we are witnessing is something that is happening across the whole region. Western imperialism is redrawing the map of the region and redrawing it with blood. And what we're witnessing is the occupation of Syria, the occupation of South Lebanon, the genocide in Gaza, the laying of the infrastructure for the preparation for mass expulsions in the West Bank, the control over all of Jordan's drinking water through the occupation of the Yarmouk River basin. And so we're in the beginnings of a second imperialist redrawing of the Middle Eastern map. And this will happen with blood. And as we saw in Palestine and then in Lebanon, for the Israeli military doctrine, the destruction of the health system is a central component of the military doctrine. We saw that yesterday in Kamal Udwan Hospital in northern Gaza, as we saw it throughout the whole of the genocide in Gaza, as we saw it in Lebanon. So we'll leave that there.
Yeah, thank you, Ghassan. And in the meantime, Dr. Mustafa has just joined us, so welcome. We're very happy that you've been able to make time for us.
Thank you.
Started off with some kind of a general question and situation, and we started in Lebanon. So my question to you would be, of course, and I know that words fail, but can you describe the current situation these days in Gaza and the West Bank?
Yes, of course. 1 second. I'm trying. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, you pressed mute, Mustafa.
It's hard to say where to start from about the situation here in Palestine, but let me start with what happened yesterday. The Israeli army, which has been destroying the north of Gaza completely, invaded Kamal Udwan Hospital, bombarded it first, and then set it on fire. They set on fire surgical department, different clinics, incubators, and they burned to death some of the medical doctors and nurses who are working in the hospital. They were stuck in the fire and died. And then they arrested all the 400 people from the hospital. And the director of the hospital is still arrested by them. And in the course of their bombardment yesterday, they killed 50 people, including 5 of the personnel of the hospital. The hospital is no more. It's finished. Practically now, all of the north of Gaza does not have any clinic or any medical facility or any hospital that can serve people. As a matter of fact, during the course of the Israeli attacks, they have eliminated and erased to the ground four towns. The town of Beit Hanun, the town of Jabalia, the town of Beit Lahia, and the Jabalia refugee camp, which used to host about 150,000 people. They are in the process of 3 war crimes that are known to you. The war crime of genocide, the war crime of collective punishment, including starving people, and the war crime of ethnic cleansing. Now they have practically ethnically cleansed all the north, all the four towns that I told you about, eliminated every source of life there. And their goal is clearly to annex this part of Gaza, at least the north of Gaza. And the attacks everywhere in Gaza continue. So far, the Israeli army has killed more than 55,000 Palestinians, 70% of whom are women, children, and elderly people, including no less than 18,000 children, in my opinion. And they've injured more than 108,000 people. And you have to add to that probably 40 or 50,000 other people who died from diseases caused by the deprivation of clean water or of food or of the different infections that are spreading all over Gaza. Out of the 108,000 people, we estimate that 25% to 30% will simply die because of lack of medical treatment and lack of proper surgical care. In reality, 10% of the population of Gaza have been killed or injured or imprisoned. 10%. That is, I mean, just to give you an idea what that means, during the Second World War, France lost only 4% of its population in the course of 5 years of the war. If we apply the 10% to the population of the United States, you would be talking about 32 million people killed or injured in the course of 14 months. And the medical personnel, as was done in Lebanon, it's the same in the Gaza. 1,100 of our medical personnel, our doctors, nurses, health professionals have been killed. 3,000 have been injured. Israel did not allow a single foreign journalist to get to Gaza, but they killed up till now 201 Palestinian journalists. The amount of explosives that were thrown on Gaza is no less than 87,000 tons of explosives. That is about 36 kilograms of explosives for each man, woman, and child. And of course, the amount of people who are disabled now because of these attacks is very huge. Among them, 5,100 people who had amputations, including at least 1,200 children who had one or more of their limbs amputated without any proper care that people, can get. Medical Relief has 76 medical teams now working in Gaza, providing care and treatment to approximately 200,000 people every month. And add to that a major center in Gaza City, which is now taking care in cooperation with the Ministry of Health of the patients who used to be treated at Shifa Hospital, like cancer patients and kidney disease cases and so on. And the people tell us that Gaza is subjected not only to bombardment, but it is subjected practically to biological warfare and chemical warfare. According to the information our colleagues give us, there is at least between 76,000 and 100,000 cases of infectious hepatitis, thousands and thousands of people with skin diseases. And on average, a Palestinian in Gaza gets sick 3 times a month with different diseases. The most difficult issue is that people are not dying because of bombardment, but also now they are dying because of cold weather. Since there are no shelters And Israel has destroyed at least 80% of all homes and shelters. And they destroyed most schools, they destroyed all universities, and people are simply dying from cold. We lost up till now, I think, 6 infants who died because of the cold weather. The other day, one even nurse died in his tent. He was not sick in any way, but clearly he died because of the cold weather. So people are dying from cold weather, dying from bombardment, and dying from starvation, because you can say that practically 2 million people in Gaza now are suffering from different degrees of malnutrition due to lack of food. According to UN agencies, during the last 4 or 5 months, what people got in Gaza is less than 6% of the humanitarian need they have. And it goes on. Of course, the West Bank itself is also subjected to attacks by Israeli illegal settlers, but also by Israeli army. We've lost more than 820 up till now, and Israel has created 52 illegal settlements. I want to summarize by saying that what we are subjected to is not only an aggression of the Palestinian people. What we have warned against in the beginning of this terrible genocide is happening, which is that Israel is behaving, as was said, as an imperial power with a fascist government. This government cannot be described except as fascist with all the crimes it is doing. And this imperial power wants to control the whole region. That's why Israel is now conducting war in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, against Yemen, against Syria, against Iraq, and Iran. And now they are spreading threats against Jordan and Egypt. What they have done in Syria after the revolution there and after the collapse of the regime is a very clear indication of the real Israeli policy, which is that they went in, they occupied more territory of Syria. They're as close as 12 kilometers to Damascus, the capital, and nobody is saying anything. In my opinion, what we see here, Gaza has become the indicator that exposed the reality of the world, and especially the reality of the Western governments and Western regimes. All this talk, all these teaching that you and us have been subjected to by Western governments about democracy, human rights, international law, international humanitarian law, etc., vanished. When it comes to Israel, it is allowed to do any crime they want. When it comes to Palestine, Palestine for them is not a country that should be subjected to international law and international humanitarian law. And in our opinion, what happened during these months, what happened during this year, is a very clear indication of how unjust the world we live in, and that we actually live in two different worlds. The world of people who are subjected to exploitation, to wars, to stealing their natural resources, stealing their territory. And those capitalist governments that continue to conduct these imperialist policies and now are supporting Israel in every possible way with weapons, with political support. And I don't mean only the United States of America, which is the main country that is responsible for what's happening here, because Israel would not be able to fight for more than a week without the United States. But I mean also governments like Britain, like Germany, like France, like so many other Western governments that refuse even to impose military embargo on Israel. Of course, there are different countries like Spain and Ireland and Slovenia that have different policy, and we appreciate that. But in general, what we see here is the worst form, the worst case of injustice in our world. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Mustafa. You've been giving these updates so many times already, and every time it's harrowing. It's terrible, of course. The reality on the ground we can hardly imagine. But let's unpack maybe the bigger picture a little bit more and explore how these events are linked to each other. For example, Zaina, for example, the day this ceasefire, so-called ceasefire, started in Lebanon was also the day that the events, the unexpected events that led to the fall of the Assad regime started to unfold in Syria. Can you explain how are these actually interlinked?
Yeah, thank you so much, Wim. Actually, looking at what's happening, really starting with Gaza in October 2023, and then what happened in Lebanon, now Syria, clearly there's a plan. And there are a lot of analysis that this might be another Sykes-Picot of redividing the region and having a new geography. But we know that since more than 15 years, the envoy from the US, Condoleezza Rice, was always speaking about the new Middle East that we have seen also in the Arab Spring that actually failed, where we saw the colored revolution, where the freedoms were on top of it as a highlight and propaganda at the expense of socioeconomic rights. But we saw that all the countries that endured the Arab Spring ended up with a fluctuation of the currency, socioeconomic challenge, more chaos, more brain drain, more refugees, etc. So effectively, this did not help these countries to flourish, but to the contrary, they regressed. Unfortunately, what we're seeing today is something similar, maybe a corrected version of this Arab Spring with some lessons learned, by putting again the freedoms on top as propaganda. But we know that whatever we are commenting on Syria as freedoms and imprisonment, etc., there is an issue of sovereignty of the region. We know that this region is full of oil and gas, and as what happened previously with colonization to Africa, we're seeing that something similar is happening now to the Middle East of invading this country. 2024, we're speaking about new occupations and a time where the UN Charter in 19, after the World War II, called for right for self-determination, for leaving these countries to self-govern themselves. But unfortunately, we did not see anything of this on the ground. We did not see empowering states to govern themselves. But to the contrary, we are seeing virtual colonialism and occupation again. So starting with Gaza, continuing in Lebanon, West Bank always affected, Syria, there are now prospects for Yemen. We're speaking about Iraq being next, Jordan, Egypt, which is the map that Netanyahu spread as being the greater Israel, which is definitely a presence of imperialism, as Dr. Barghouti was speaking, which is extremely very worrying for us and for these countries. Lebanon in the past 5 years and us as humanitarians really have endured all type of emergencies. So we're talking about the revolution in 2019 that was followed by a socioeconomic crisis with the currency losing its value 90%, a health crisis with the COVID and the cholera spread, the Beirut explosion, which was the biggest after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Lebanon supporting Syria and Turkey with the earthquake, a political crisis, a constitutional crisis without a president for the past 3 years, a caretaker economy, and Lebanon really doing bad in terms of sustainability forward. And really, this war hasn't been easy. And now we're wondering if there is really funds for reconstruction. So, and as highlighted, really, I think that's a big question about international law. In a time where the West was always calling for rule of law, now we're only seeing a rule of power and the double standards and no respect to any human rights conventions that are there without any reaction. And this is really very worrying for the new generations. But the opportunity is now, despite the double standard where nobody was speaking about it before, we are seeing that the new generation and the youth especially, and what happened with the encampment, etc., is raising the awareness of the new generation on the righteous causes. And this really is promising for the way forward to really push for these for having one standard, and that there are no double standards. But what is clear, coming back to your question, clearly Lebanon's last war was in 2006. Clearly, this plan has been prepared for the past 15 years, and definitely there are questions towards how was the start, and to demolish all the resistance that really is trying to protect the lands, which is the right of these people to protect their land, and targeting Lebanon. More than 100 primary healthcare centers could not be reached during the war. More than 7 hospitals also targeted, targeting the press, civil defense, and the nurses, which is a huge infringement of the international law. But also there was one comment towards that in 2006 war, we saw a lot of blood. Now we are seeing people burning directly, a very few blood. And this is something really to reflect on what type of arms and what type of weapons are being used. Also, the houses that are being destroyed, after being demolished, they are being burned. So also question marks towards what are these weapons that they are using. And the pagers, which is also a huge infringement towards using a similar type of weapons towards these people. In 1 second, more than 3,000 people targeted. So the main question is the eligibility, or where is this going? And now with Syria, we are seeing so far more than 92,000 displaced people, being Lebanese or Syrian, from the Bekaa towards the Lebanese lands. But at the same time, we saw that Lebanon, who had the highest refugee per capita, around 350,000 who had already left voluntarily back to Syria because they were waiting to enter without punishment. So really, the questions are, I think everybody's very worried. How much prioritizing freedoms and these propagandas towards the stability and the sustainability, and would the ceasefire be really a ceasefire as it took place in 2006, or it's going to start again now, because we saw more than 100 infringement to the ceasefire in the past period where there was no respect from the Israeli side. Thank you.
So thank you. So Dr. Ghassan, let me come back to you, because you always seem to be on the right place at the right time. You were the first doctor to go to Gaza after the events of October 7, 23, and you were in Lebanon in October 24. How come you seem to be able to anticipate what is going to happen in the region?
I think if you believe that imperialism and capitalism has to be continuously on the offensive, and do not allow yourself to indulge in wishful thinking. And as Palestinians, we've witnessed the shift in the debate within the Zionist movement towards the conclusion that the biggest mistake the Zionist movement, and according to Benny Morris, potentially the fatal mistake the Zionist movement made, was to allow some Palestinians to remain in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and inside the Green Line after 1948. And that the only solution is to do what Western settler colonialisms have done, which is completely eliminate the indigenous populations. One can see that Zionism was headed towards genocide as a form of elimination of the indigenous population, rather than separation or exclusion or expulsion. And so it was clear on the 7th of October that that was going to happen, because we had seen it in Hawara in the West Bank on some smaller pogroms. Just as the pogroms in Western Europe were the prelude to the Holocaust, the pogroms in the West Bank were the prelude to the genocide in Gaza. In terms of global capital and the crisis of global capital, it was apparent the kind of so what I had felt was you had Western imperialism jettisoning the tools, the founding myths of the post-Second World War liberal state, which were international law, ICC, ICJ, all of these tools of humanitarianism that were necessary myths in justifying Western foreign policy, even if they were lies. Western imperialist powers were jettisoning them to protect the Zionist project, to protect their settler colonial project. And so the question is, why would you do that without thinking about the day after? If what you wanted in the day after, you did not need these tools as excuses or as tools to manage Western imperialism. And so what we ended up seeing is exactly that, that the more blood was being spilt in Gaza, the more election results in Europe and then the UK and then the US were shifting towards the consolidation of the right at the expense of the far right, at the expense of liberalism, because the language of liberalism was no longer necessary. And so it was obvious that the kind of blood, the genocidal blood, the kind of investment that the West made in the genocide, we have to accept that Israel is not an ally of the West. Israel is an appendage of the West. It's the stick that it beats us with. And therefore, this genocide is a Belgian, French, German, British, American genocide with Israel as the settler colony with which these things are being carried out. And so what is obvious is that that investment in such a genocidal project, with the consequences that it had politically with regards to the founding myths that I spoke about, means that that global capital and Western imperialism really wants to reshape the region. And my feeling is you can trace that back to when Obama was about to leave office and said that the United States needs to pivot away from the Middle East to the Pacific in preparation for the war in China. It means that the Middle East has to be cleared of all structures, all entities, and most importantly, cleared of all communities that would resist. And so the most recalcitrant communities in the Middle East, in terms of generation after generation of resistance to colonialism. You know, we shouldn't forget that the biggest crisis that faced the British Empire was the 1936 Palestinian Revolution in the whole of the British Empire, and then Palestinian generation after Palestinian generation. And so the need to genocidally alter sociologically these communities in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in the south of Lebanon, so that they no longer, or at least for multiple generations, are capable of mounting the kind of resistance that they have mounted. And, you know, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah, are just the last manifestations of these resistances from these communities that have resisted colonialism since colonialism came to this part of the world in the First World War. And so that's, for me, it was apparent that Israel was going to need to start another war in Lebanon. In August, when there were the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran and then Shukr in Beirut, it was apparent that the Israelis were looking for an excuse. And then the pager attack happened, and I thought something of this magnitude has to be a precursor. And that's why I went to Lebanon, because that's what is going to happen. And my belief is we're still not even halfway through this. That the West is still going to reshape Syria. The West is going to reshape northern Iraq and western Iraq, and that Jordan will pay the price. And so all of this region is about to be redrawn.
Yeah, thank you, Ghassan. That's amazing analysis. And someone in the chat already asked a question about campaigns. We'll come to that later, but first I would like to ask a question also to you, Dr. Mustafa, because as Ghassan said, and you also mentioned it, the maps of the Middle East are being redrawn these days. They're redrawn with blood. But if I hear Ghassan's analysis, would you agree then that it's actually the United States and Western Europe that are holding the pen?
Absolutely. I think there is the long question that is asked frequently, whether United States runs Israel or Zionist Israeli movement is running the United States. And I think the question is not needed here. I mean, it's not the right question, because in reality, what you see here is a very strong, powerful alliance between Israel and the Zionist movement and the United States of America. Israel is has simply, since it was established, played the role of a servant of the imperialist interests in the region. I mean, most of you were born after that, of course, and most of us. But we cannot forget what happened in 1956 when Britain and France decided to attack Egypt because Nasser was leading Egypt at the time and was supporting the liberation struggle in Algeria and in North Africa in general. And he nationalized the Suez Canal, which was functioning as a French-British company. And Britain and France decided to attack Egypt, and so they initiated the war with Israel. Israel started the war in 1956. But then, at that time, the alliance with the United States was not that strong. And Ben-Gurion, the prime minister of Israel at the time, made the conclusion that we will not allow this to happen anymore because their war failed in 1956, because the United States did not support it fully. So in this case, Israeli Zionist movement shifted its alliances to the United States, to the biggest power. But that doesn't mean that they are not serving the interest of the British Empire or the British colonial structure or the other Western governments. What we see today, we live in a world that has become one. I mean, with a very clear globalization of capitalist interest. And you can see that from the structure of Trump's administration and from the alliance, for instance, between Musk and Trump. What connects them together except control of wealth? And so, yes, I do think that what we see here is a very powerful alliance. Israel now, in this case, is used as the instrument to rearrange the Middle East with one particular purpose, which is to control the economies of the Middle East, to control the natural resources of the Middle East, to control the strategic positions of the Middle East, and to use all of that in the future struggle with Russia and China, between the United States and some Western governments and Russia and China. It is very clear geopolitical goal, but it doesn't mean that this is our destiny and it has to happen. That also depends on the struggle of the peoples of this region. And I think what Palestinians have done, what Lebanese people have done, what is an amazing story of unprecedented level of commitment to resistance and powerful resistance, actually, that restrained to some extent what Israel is doing. Don't forget that Israel that defeated 3 Arab governments, 3 Arab big armies in 1967 in less than 5 days. They defeated Jordan, Jordanian army, Egyptian army, and the Syrian army. This same army is incapable of crushing the Palestinian resistance in Gaza already after 15 months. I mean, that by itself shows that when there is a will of the people and when there is insistence on resistance, they don't, the imperialist power and Israel in particular cannot absolutely do what they want. And that's why we build our hopes on the ability of reunifying, first of all, the internal Palestinian situation, which is still suffering from terrible divisions, but also to unify the efforts and the will and the resistance of all the Arab people in the region against these imperialist plans, because if they are fulfilled, it would be a disaster for ages. And that's where we look for your help. We look for stronger solidarity from the international community, from the revolutionary movements, from the different social movements worldwide, including our social movement and People's Health Council, to provide support to Palestinians. And in my opinion, the most important goal in this case, for the sake of the Lebanese, the Palestinians, the Syrians, and everybody, is to impose sanctions on Israel, to demand that boycott, divestment sanctions is imposed on Israel. I think that's the kind of solidarity action that could crystallize the solidarity worldwide into a material effect affecting Israel. One last point, which I think we should pay more attention to, is that what we deal with in Israel is a fascist government. I mean that literally. It's a fascist behavior, a fascist government, which, by the way, will start also eating Israel from within, because they have been proud of themselves as a Zionist movement that is aggressive against everybody, but internally they could keep their unity based on internal democracy for Jewish people and on rule of law, the rule of law. These two aspects of Israel are being crushed now gradually by the rise of this fascist movement, which has its base in religious Zionist movements and especially the illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank.
Okay, thank you. So we'll come back to boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS, and other campaigns later. But someone asked another question about the political situation in the region, asking specifically what the role is of Turkey and Erdogan. Can any of you comment on this? Maybe also a question for you, Dr. Mustafa.
Well, it's a peculiar role because from one side, Turkey declared that it is supporting the Palestinian people. And they declared that they are having economic boycott with Israel. But at the same time, we all know that Turkey is a member of NATO. And Turkey is not far from the United States. The last operation in Syria, I don't know what to call it. I call it operation in Syria, which led to the fall of the Assad regime. And nobody, of course, can defend a dictatorship, especially like the one which was torturing its own people and which led its country into this terrible disaster. But nevertheless, it is not clear what kind of regime is prevailing now in Syria. What worries me most, and I was the first one to speak about this and write about this, what worries me most is the very weak reaction from the side of the Syrian new regime and Turkey about the Israeli invasion of Syria and about the fact that Israel has expanded its occupation of Syrian territory and I think doubled or tripled it. The lack of reaction in this regard is very worrying. On the other hand, Turkey supported the Islamic groups that took over the regime now in Syria, promising that they will be open and that they will move in the direction of respecting the integrity of Syria and so on. At the same time, Turkey has one particular interest, which is to crush the Kurdish movements that are trying to get independence of Kurdish, of Kurdistan, as they say. So here is a key point, because from one side, Turkey is against the Kurds, and they want the regime now in Syria to take over the control of the Kurdish areas, where Americans are staying and where Americans are also supporting the Kurdish groups. Israel is trying to promote internal divisions in Syria by encouraging the separation of Kurds from the rest of Syria and the Druze from the rest of Syria. So they are using very viciously the old colonial tactic of divide and rule. So as you can see, it's a very complex situation. And I want also to add that we as Palestinians, and I think our Lebanese colleagues have the same feeling, we are absolutely unhappy, distressed, totally frustrated with the lack of solidarity from Arab and Muslim countries when it comes to all these Israeli crimes that are conducted against us. And the fact that some Arab countries like Morocco, like Bahrain, like Emirates continued their normalization and relations with Israel when Israel is committing genocide against us is by itself a very terrible indicator of how poor the situation is. But I'm sure my colleagues will add to that.
Ghassan, Zainab,
So I
do
think
you want to-
I don't know what the proper English translation for it, but the secret password to politics in the region for any aspiring regional power like Turkey, or for the new rulers in Damascus, like Julani and his people, and his governor yesterday, who said that he wants peace with Israel and has no issues with Israel bombing Syria and so on. The secret password is accommodating Israeli expansionism, because that is the route to whitewashing what is effectively Al-Qaeda middle management coming to power in Syria. I mean, let's have no qualms about it. Despite all of the brutal wars America waged since 9/11 in the name of fighting Al-Qaeda, the United States and Western powers and the United Kingdom are politically laundering the respectability of Julani, who was Al-Qaeda middle management, the head of his security, who was also Al-Qaeda middle management, and major parts of his faction. And so what you have is an understanding by everybody that if you want the West to accept whatever crimes you commit, accept whatever crimes you have committed in the past, the secret is to ensure that you pose absolutely no challenge to Israel's regional aspirations to expand this area of ethnically cleansed buffer zone. And that is what the Turks have done. And that is what the new rulers in Damascus have done. The West remains steadfast in the idea that anyone who supports Israel, regardless of how brutal or how murderous they are, will be welcome, as long as they protect Israel and ensure that Israeli appetite in the region goes unchallenged.
Yeah, no, that's very insightful. But let's
If I can add here.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, if I can add here, Wim, Lebanon's civil war that lasted for more than 17 years, the main title of it was the war of others on our land. And unfortunately, we are seeing the same happening now. for the region, which is the war of the others on our land, where we're seeing that all these big powers are fighting, because we know that after World War II, and now there are really clashes happening with the big powers that are reflecting on us, in addition to the increased population of the world with the minimal resources that are there, where everybody's fighting on it. And we have seen with the evaluation of the Arab Spring, where we really prioritized the civil and political rights in front of the socioeconomic rights, pushing for freedoms only and forgetting about equality of life and ensuring minimum standard of living, that democracy does not look like the Arab world. We know that this is the best system so far, but clearly there is a lot of prerequisite that needs to be done at the educational level to enhance citizenship before prioritizing these freedoms in a time where the societal structure is not ready to welcome so much freedoms, which effectively led to more chaos than to enhancing the rule of law. And it's very astonishing how much really there is a huge disregard towards the international law, re-questioning the ICC and its decisions, and using these tools and these instruments in a double standards is not healthy for the new generation, to really show that these are used for powerful tools and not. So what we're seeing here is the survival of the fittest, much more than a rule of law and what we used to ask for. So unfortunately, but we have seen that also humanitarian support is political. Lebanon's explosion, who had seen an overplus of support, now did not reach more than 30% of its humanitarian needs. But the opportunity is the beautiful solidarity that happened between the Lebanese themselves, between the communities themselves, and between the also support with the diaspora that unfortunately is recurrently being pushed. And we are in a time where we have the highest refugee number in history, which is also very alarming. In a time where we're speaking of peace and non-violent technique, we are only seeing violence and construction and use of violence to acquire the biggest roles. So, and we have to say that Amel's model, where which is a non-sectarian organization, that we had a challenge of access to many of our centers, and we moved our modalities to being mobile. We succeeded to do more than 45,000 health consultation in the 66 days, increasing our mobile modality from 8 mobile units to 24, and to increasing the geographical spread and more than 50,000 relief items distributed, and the beautiful solidarity that are on the ground in a time also where our team, more than half of it was displaced themselves and they were supporting displaced. But how much can we still count on our really current resources? As Dr. Barghouti is saying, that we have seen a lack of solidarity, and if there was one line and support to each other, definitely we had been in a better scenario. And the issue of Palestine is not only an issue of a country, it's an issue of humanity, an issue of justice. What's happening in Gaza is cannot be described. Some people cannot really don't have the courage to really see the photos anymore. What about enduring it? So what's happening is we should not normalize it. We should not accept it. We should raise it at every single instance, because this is accepting injustice. This is accepting violence. So definitely unity is the way forward. How Lebanon is coping is through this resilience. Lebanese has always been standing with the right to life, the right to move. In a time it could be described by schizophrenia. One day there is war, another day people are partying, and this is a way to cope and to chill and to be able to move forward. But this is not okay, because people have the right for self-determination. We should ask for more protection from the international arena, and we should really push for more values, more ethics towards our aim. And we have seen that the way to acquire this domination is through fragmentation. What we have seen in Sudan, by fragmenting the country, there is a better way to control it. And this is clearly what's happening all over. But also the way out is also to increase our awareness. towards how to move next, how to get together, how to get more politically mobilized, because there is demolishment of our history, our cemeteries, our belongings, and definitely this is not okay. So we should keep our hands together towards fighting for this, and hopefully there will be a way out.
I want to add a point, if possible.
Yes, please, go ahead.
To Zena, I want to say that it's very important that we always remember that democracy is not just political democracy. The real democracy is that it should be political and social democracy. I mean, you can't separate them from each other, because otherwise you end up, as you have described, talking about certain political aspects and forgetting about the social rights of the people. On the issue of humanitarian support, I mean, the very clear example of the hypocrisy of the West is what's happening to UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, which was designed and structured in 1949 to serve the Palestinian refugees who should have been allowed to come back home to the areas in Palestine from where they were displaced, 521 communities that were erased to the ground. And as a matter of fact, the United Nations conditioned its recognition of Israel with the implementation of two resolutions, 194, which is the right of Palestinian refugees to come back home, and 181, which is the right of Palestinians to have a state of their own. Of course, none were implemented. But now Israel is after UNRWA. It is trying to kill the organization that was created by United Nations to help the refugees, the victims of the Israeli displacement and ethnic cleansing. And Israel has adopted a law that prohibits any kind of cooperation with UNRWA and prohibits UNRWA from working in any area that is under Israeli sovereignty. This is one way of killing UNRWA. But what is most shocking is that this is not coming only from Israel. It's coming from a country like Holland and Sweden, who have been regular contributors to UNRWA, deciding to cut off support to UNRWA completely. That gives you a very good example of how humanitarian work and humanitarian needs, knowing very well that nobody can replace UNRWA in Gaza for the humanitarian needs of the people. And nobody can replace UNRWA in general for Palestinian refugees, whether in Palestine or including in Gaza or in Lebanon or in Syria or in Jordan. Nevertheless, this is what is really important for me to look at. It's not the Israeli behavior that is expected, but the fact that a country like Holland and Sweden, which used to be proud of itself as an avant-garde of human rights and humanitarian support, engage with Israel in trying to kill UNRWA. That is, in my opinion, a very particular example of how humanitarian aid is used for political purposes all the time.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, in the final round, maybe the next 15, 20 minutes, I would like to focus on resistance and hope. But someone asked a question also about the role of China and Russia, but I would like to broaden it. Do you think there are also countries in the global south, it might be Russia, it might be China or other countries that play a positive role that can be considered as allies of the Palestinian people? Is that something you want to answer, Dr. Mustafa?
Sure. Well, the country that has been in the avant-garde in solidarity with Palestine more than anybody else was South Africa. And you've seen how South Africa sponsored the case at the ICJ and in several other areas. And South Africa is leading the way now in creating a global anti-apartheid movement in Palestine. The other country that was really very impressive, and I met with the foreign minister of that country recently in Doha, was Colombia, where Colombia not only decided to cut relations with Israel and to support Palestinians fully and totally, but also they went as far as complete economic boycott of Israel. And Israel was importing 80%, I think, of its needs from coal from Colombia. So this is all stopped. That's an example. I mean, these two countries provided one of the best examples of how a country should behave. Downgrading or eliminating political or diplomatic relations with Israel, boycotting Israel, and supporting Palestinians fully and completely. Russia and China support Palestinian rights, but Russia is not the Soviet Union of the past. And China is not the China of the 60s and 70s. One of our problems is that we are encountering an aggression by Israel, supported fully and 100% by United States of America, which gave Israel $40 billion in 14 months, $40 billion of explosives, of weapons. The most sophisticated arms in the world are in the hands of the United States and Israel only. And they gave Israel everything. And they supported Israel in every possible way. We don't see a country like the Soviet Union used to be, for instance, in the 70s, encountering the weight of the United States of America. And so here, yes, Russia and China support our rights. They vote with us in the United Nations and so on. But I cannot say that they are providing fully and completely the support they could be providing if they wanted to. And the relationship between Russia and Israel is affected by the fact that there are maybe 1.5 million Jewish Russians who immigrated from Russia to Israel and who maintain strong relations with the Russian community and with Russian media, etc., etc. So these are complexities that we have to look at. But of course, we don't stop our efforts with these two countries to upscale and enhance their solidarity with the Palestinian people. The problem is that when you look at, we had big hopes in BRICS, for instance, because BRICS is becoming a front of many countries. But then you look at BRICS, yes, Russia and China diplomatically are with Palestine. South Africa is fully with Palestine. But then India is supporting Israel. India changed under Modi and under this government. So I think when you look at the world, in general, there is an overwhelming support to Palestine, unprecedented, by the way, after the massacres in Gaza. You can see that in the United Nations General Assembly vote. But we haven't reached that level of solidarity that is required and that is needed. And that's why I think one of the most important things we should be doing as Palestinians is to communicate and connect with so many other social and political movements worldwide, to act as a liberation movement, not as an authority under occupation. The problem with Palestinian internal structure is that the PLO was consumed by a Palestinian authority that is losing all authority whatsoever. And what we need is to act as a national liberation movement in our behavior with all countries of the world.
Yes, that's of course very clear. But from the level of the governments, let's maybe also discuss how we as citizens, as health activists, can join this resistance and support the liberation movement. BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions was mentioned, but Dr. Ghassan, do you think it's really effective?
So there are two places that we want to address. People in the south and then people in the center of the empire. for people in the South, they need to understand two things. That now in the 21st century, global capital has tested the weapons, the technology, and the means for genocidal colonial war. Not genocidal tools to inflict colonial war, as we've seen in the past since the Second World War, but actually genocide as a tool for colonial war. The weapons that were used in Gaza will be used in Kashmir, they'll be used in Nairobi, they'll be used in Brazil, they'll be used everywhere against surplus populations. Global capital's biggest crisis economically is surplus populations. Technology has created surplus populations that need to be managed, and Israel has provided a model for management of surplus populations, initially in the siege of Gaza and now in the genocide of Gaza. And so those in the South need to understand that that's what's coming. Genocidal wars for those populations that get in the way of global capital and its imperial, ever-expanding appetite for the resources in the South. For those surplus, economically surplus populations at the heart of the empire, in Europe, in North America, they need to understand that the jettisoning of liberalism that was necessary for the conduct and the enablement of this war and the growth of fascism will come at an expense to the rights of people inside those classes inside the heart of the empire that are either surplus or that offer resistance to the empire. And we know that historically, especially in the late 19th century, 20th century, that the more that these classes in the heart of the empire allied themselves with the anti-colonial struggles happening in the South, the more their chances of affecting change in Western Europe increase. And so what we're asking people to do is not to offer solidarity with the Palestinian people and the Lebanese people and the Syrian people as a form of indulgence or of kind-heartedness, but as a way of understanding that what is being done in the Middle East will be done elsewhere. It will be done in the Americas, it will be done in Africa, it will be done in Asia. And therefore, we need to understand that global capital now has reached a genocidal phase, and that genocidal phase will be exacted on peoples across the globe. In terms of health, as health workers, we need to understand two things. That genocidal war identifies the health infrastructure and the health system as a critical component of the genocidal project. The destruction of the health system is now going to be central to the doctrine, to the military doctrines of the imperial war that will be conducted. The destruction of hospitals, the killing of doctors. There was a paper coming out in Gaza that shows that your chances of being killed if you're a doctor and a nurse are 3.5 times higher than the rest of the population in Gaza. And so the systematic destruction of health as the embodiment of the necropolitics of genocidal erasure will also become a tactic being used elsewhere on people across the globe. And so what we are saying to people in the rest of humanity is that the war in the Middle East is a harbinger for what's to come. And unless you stand up now, you will be defending your own families the way Palestinians and Lebanese are defending their own families. With regards to this particular organization, I think there is a historic moment that we need to seize, which is to re-embrace the concept of liberation medicine. What Dr. Hussam Abu-Sittah and his colleagues have been doing in Kamal Udwan, what Dr. Muhammad Abeid and Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was killed by the Israelis, were doing at Al-Awda Hospital, what Dr. Fadl Naeem and his colleagues are doing at Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza City, what doctors, nurses, health workers, what the health workers of the medical relief committees are doing in Gaza, is reimagining the giving of life and the giving of health as a form of resistance against the necropolitics of genocide. And health workers across the globe who have had this rupture in the concept of liberation medicine that was then hijacked by humanitarianism, hijacked by international NGOs that are a central part of imperialism's soft power. We need to reimagine health as a form of resistance, as a form of anti-colonial resistance, the way it was in the War of Liberation in Vietnam, it was in Algeria, and end this period of benevolent, charitable humanitarianism by white saviors, and reimagine health provision as a form of anti-colonial struggle.
Thank you. That's the call for re-establishing health as a central pole of the anti-colonial resistance, and reviewing again liberation medicine. I think that's something we, with the People's Health Movement, really take to heart. But apart from that, what other campaigns, what other calls are now urgent as we go into the next phase of the war? Where do we have to put our efforts? In what kind of campaigns? Is it still BDS? We have talked about the weapons embargo. Dr. Barghouti, I see you coming online again.
I was with you. I was just walking a little bit because I had to walk my back.
Can imagine.
What we have figured out over the last year is that Israel and the genocide in Gaza is the tip of an iceberg. And it is a tip of a genocidal iceberg that is composed of Western institutions that have enabled a televised genocide to go unchallenged for 14 months. And so what we need to do is go after those genocide enablement institutions, whether they are medical institutions in the West, whether they are universities conducting research on weapons and technology with Israeli universities, whether it is sanctions against governments, entities, hedge funds, banks, companies that bankroll the genocidal regime in Palestine. All of this iceberg of genocide enablement needs to be dismantled, and each of these institutions needs to be taken to task. The law remains the Achilles heel of capitalism. And therefore, in order for us to dismantle it, we need to use the law. There are organizations now with over 1,000 arrest warrants for active Israeli soldiers who are now on their holidays in South America, in India, in Asia, in Europe, and this organization, the Hind Project, after the girl who was killed by the Israelis, is going after these soldiers. There are student groups looking at ownership of shares by universities in the arms industry. Every aspect of this genocide enablement project that has protected and supported the killing of Palestinians for the last 14 months needs to be dismantled. And therefore, there's not a shortage of options to go after. And I think organizations and people, wherever they are, need to see where they are functioning and go after these institutions that have helped this genocide continue unchallenged. And that is the essence of this. These institutions are part of the genocidal machine. The BBC is part of the genocidal machine. The Times, the New York Times is part of the genocidal machine. Every university with shares in arms manufacturers is part of the genocidal machine. Every institution that owns shares in Israeli companies is part of the genocidal machine. Every academic who does research with Israeli universities is part of the genocidal machine. There are no third parties in this war. There is the genocide enablement and protection project. And then there are the victims. And you either have to side with one or the other.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
I think what was said is very clear and very good, but I would prioritize solidarity actions in 4 priorities. Definitely, as Dr. Abu-Sittah said, the first priority is to stop the genocide, to stop the war on Gaza, to demand ceasefire immediately. And we must admit and accept the fact that in the beginning of the attack on Gaza, in the beginning of the genocide, we had an amazing amount of global solidarity that spread all over the world, including in campuses in the West, including in so many countries. And then we've seen it calming down. In the case of the United States and maybe some other Western governments, like countries like Germany, there was an oppressive action. I mean, there was a system of oppression that started suppressing some of these solidarity activities to the level, as you know, that some of the presidents of these universities had to resign, like Harvard and others. Now we need, I think, we cannot accept that the world is getting used to the genocide. But it is getting used to the genocide. So it is very important for activists and movements worldwide to reactivate the same level of solidarity and the same level of attention to the genocide that is taking place. And I think the world can respond. I was amazed, for instance, about the amount of responses I had on Twitter to the video that I published about what happened in Kamal Udwan Hospital. That means the people are there. The problem is that the movements got tired, and we need to reactivate that. So the first priority is to stop the genocide in every possible way. Second priority, it's the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign. And we do see successes, big successes, like in the case of Norway, where millions and millions of dollars are being divested from Israel. We should emphasize that boycott, divestment, sanctions is a major tool that should be facilitated and spread all over and activated as one of the instruments to pressure Israel. The third way is, of course, what was mentioned by Dr. Abu-Sittah, which are the legal fight, the legal struggle, including going after the Israeli war criminals, the officers, the soldiers, who have published thousands and thousands of videos that condemn them to participating in the genocide. I think the work that is done at that level is also very effective and can be influential on what happens in Israel. But the last, fourth priority is to recognize that with Trump coming to power in the United States, it is quite possible that Israel will try to conduct two major, to achieve two major goals. One is annexation of the West Bank to Israel, Judaization of the West Bank through settlement activities, but also official annexation of the West Bank. I think Trump has given promises to some of his Jewish donors that, as he supported before the movement of the American embassy to Jerusalem and recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, this time he will support the annexation of the West Bank. So that is a very important issue. But the second, also very important issue, is ethnic cleansing. The biggest two risks that will face Palestinians in the coming period are ethnic cleansing in Gaza and in the West Bank, but firstly in Gaza, and second, the annexation of the West Bank. So I think if we identify these four priorities and concentrate on each of them in the best possible way, I think this would be the best way to help Palestinians. Of course, the struggle against imperialism is a long life struggle. It will take a very long time to bring down many of these terrible structures worldwide. But for Palestinians, these four specific points are the most important at the moment.
I would like to add here, Wim, if I may, that
Sure.
the opportunities that we're seeing here is that the new generation that did not live the Intifada now witnessing what's happening in Gaza, and in a time where the Palestinian cause starting to fade, now is coming back to be on the top of all causes. And this is something that will help to get to acquire things on the long term, because we are seeing clearly that there is a big alienation of the Israelis in many societies whenever they're entering the theater or walking on the roads, etc., which is from the first months of in October 2023, the Israelis themselves were saying we will need 10 years to bring back our reputation. I think now, after more than a year, this might not be reversible anymore. I think there is a big loss of reputation that may not be recuperated anytime. So this is something that will help the cause on the long term to really pick up on the rights of the Palestinians and all the populations that are being affected. And knowing that economically they are struggling, there are huge clashes inside that are happening between themselves. Netanyahu is faced with an internal court of corruption, and also that a huge population of the Israelis already have 2 passports and more than 500,000 already left. So those are opportunities that could pick up on the long term, that could help really for justice, for humanity to be next to each other. And to add on your previous question, Ireland is also a country that is there and that is empathetic with what's happening with Palestine because they have lived something similar. And legally speaking, what's happening is much more than genocide. This is an ethnic cleansing, as Dr. Barghouti is saying, because this is erasing a country, trying to erase a population, which hopefully will not take place and needs to be preserved. So definitely, we know that there are it's true that we are not at the level of fighting with the weapons that are there, but there are lots of things that we could do on a personal level that could really impact, which is we know that we are sinking in our challenges, but we as Arabs and developing countries should always think about the tools that bring us together to form a force in front of all these atrocities, to ask for only justice and equality. And definitely youth will play a big role, and also the rise of women and girls that believe with having a bigger voice also could help the other population to acquire on the long term. We should not underestimate how much a BDS could do. And this is definitely, those are small things that could happen towards, and we know that already many companies closed and many branches closed. So we should set our action points to get together, fight together this, and learn from each other. And we know that many countries in Latin America and many other places also are faced with similar things that should let us really bring our movement together to fight all of this. And one example is the plan for Lebanon was to occupy more than 30% of it. And luckily with the resistance, there is a debate if this is a victory or not, but what we can say is that Lebanon, now they are still withdrawing, but Lebanon succeeded to protect a good proportion of the land in a time where they came with planes and missiles and guns, and Lebanon only had guns and a very fragile army, and luckily they could not implement their plan. So definitely we should put our hands together to fight for this, and we should think about ways that could let us really fight these atrocities and preserve our resources that are a strength of what we have already.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I would like to wrap up here. I think it was a very interesting discussion. And I was also very happy that we can end with some hope that indeed we can build this resistance also in 2025, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But as we wrap up this seminar, I'd like to thank, of course, in the first place, the three speakers, but also Miguel, our communications officer, who set up the logistics for the webinar, the two interpreters that allowed for our Spanish-speaking friends and comrades in Latin America and anywhere in the world to join. And of course, also to you, everyone who joined us today, even in the midst of the holiday season. So we've discussed many serious and pressing issues, and there's no denying it. 24 has been a tough year, and 25 will likely also bring its challenges. But let that not stop us from celebrating and enjoying this festive season. So please also take some time to rest, to reconnect with friends and family, and to recharge. And I think that the joy and the strength we find now that will fuel our resistance and empower us to keep fighting for the right to health in 25. So thank you all, and I wish you all peaceful and joyful holiday season.
Let's hope that 2025 will be a better year with your work and your resistance and resilience. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Barghouti. Thank you, everyone.